What's up, guys? It's MFF here, back with another video. In this week's video, there's not going to be any action. I'll have some fishing shots, but this is going to be a completely informational video on winter trout fishing the Driftless. So stay tuned. I got it all laid out here in bits if you want to skip to. I'm going to be covering everything from the very basics to the little bit more complex stuff. So if you want to maybe just watch one of the segments, I'll have that right here. But otherwise, we'll get right into it. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is kind of when to fish and what to do with the weather in the winter, because the conditions can be very variable and they can also be very not good fishing because it's winter. So I'm going to kind of go over how I like to look at the forecast when choosing to pick a winter fishing day in the Driftless. So during the winter season, we'll get cold spells like right now where you can't fish. And I go off the base guidelines of when I want to fish is if I see a 25-degree plus day, I'm good to go. If it's colder than that, you can fish. You can fish single digits to 20 degrees. Guys do it all the time. But there's a couple of reasons I don't. One, even if you're putting de-ice on your line or PAM spray, your guides will consistently freeze up and it becomes a pain in the, if you know what I mean. Number two, it's hard on the fish if you want to get photo or video, which I do a lot. And you could say, well, don't get photo or video. That's fine, you can. But you would really should keep those fish wet fully. Do not take them out of the water at all if it's below 30, below 25, especially if it's not a sunny day. That air temp is brutal on their gills and eyes if they're held out of the water for even 10 to 30 seconds. So I like to just let the fish be when it's cold, man. Let them be. If it's that cold, I don't want to be doing it. It's not worth it in my opinion. You guys can. If you're really ambitious, you can. But I like to see that 24, 25 degree to 32 in that range is what I'm going to be getting out in the winter. So on these days, the bite window can be very finicky because it's cold still in the morning and you got to wait for it to warm up. So a lot of times 1 to 3, 1 to 4 that afternoon when you get to 28, 29, 30 degrees, the sun is at its full height. That is when the best bite is on those typical days. And it can be some pretty good fishing. Winter fishing the Driftless numbers wise, and you can get some big fish. It can be pretty good. It's just you have a lot smaller window to work with when they're very active. Now that's not to say it's not worth getting to a spot at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning and figure out what's going on. I do that all the time. I still get up and get going in the winter. Just, you might want to hold your horses and expect the bite to be better from, 1 to 3 or 11 to 2 and wait for that time and be ready to fish harder when that time hits. But it can still pay off getting there early and trying to figure out a pattern before the bite window really picks up. Now, we will get those 32 to 40 degree days, which are awesome. You get out there, you're only in a sweatshirt then, you get the sunshine, it's starting to feel like spring as we get into February. But the one thing you have to watch for is sometimes those days it's actually an early window, because what will happen, especially if we have snow or slush built up on the ground, is as it gets to 33, 34, 35 and the sun peaks, you get snow melt, which, yeah, it's getting warmer, but that cools the water temps down and actually slows the bite down. So on those days, you can have some great fishing. Just remember to fish it before the snow melt hits the water and shuts the bite off. Some of those days I do get it there at first light. It's still a little chilly because, it's 28, it's winter, whatever, but the best fishing can be in the morning on a lot of those warmer days. Or as that stain is just hitting the water and just starting to cool it down, by making it murky, I've noticed that has picked up the bite. Now, talking about water temps, the one way you can avoid and get away from cold runoff, or on those really cold days where the water's cold everywhere and it's 25 degrees and there's been shelf ice and you're coming out of a cold front like we have right now, finding springs is very important this time of year. It doesn't matter if you're in a lower section or a middle section or upper section, finding areas that have a lot of springs that can keep the water temps 45 to 50 is a game changer, and it has been my more productive spots in the winter are areas that are dominated with a lot of springs. Now you may ask, well, how do I know what to look for springs? Here's an example of a spring. Especially when the snow is on the ground, they're very easy to spot because it's open flowing water coming out of bluffs, coming out of fields, and you can see it so much easier on the snow. But another one, just get a thermometer. I mean, seriously, if you're going to be winter fishing, get a thermometer. You can actually check different sections and see, okay, this section is 5 degrees warmer. There's probably a few more springs. You can't visually see every spring either. There's a lot of ones that seep up from under pools that are coming underwater and you don't even notice. So having a thermometer is key in the winter because you want to be finding water temps in that 40 degree, lower 40 range. And they're out there. There's plenty of creeks that stay 40 degrees all year round in the Driftless. And those are the best spots to fish on those really cold days. or when we're getting a lot of runoff that's actually cooling down lower and middle sections. And that's to kind of my water temp point. You definitely can catch trout 30 to 40 degrees, like they bite. I've had some good days at 38, 39 degree water temps, but I really try to find that magic 40 number in the winter. I mean, you can find stuff even on really cold days that's 46 to 48 if there's really a lot of powerful springs nearby. So I do like having this on me and trying to find that water warmer. It seems like you get more bitey fish in the winter. And that kind of leads to location. Yes, I'm generally targeting more headwater areas in the winter. It's a lot easier to get through the brush in these areas as well that time of year. So it makes for a great time to explore some of the smaller stuff. And the smaller stuff with more springs, like I said, it's going to be fishing better. The water's warmer, the lower sections are going to have way more shelf life, the fish are way more inactive. So it's a good time of year to focus your efforts on higher up sections where the water is a little warmer. And just a little tidbit on that, that's not to say you can't find a bunch of springs lower down in the system and have good little lower sneaky sections in the winter, and they're out there. I have a few, but generally speaking, headwaters are going to be where the majority of the springs are. It's the source of the creek. It's usually way more up into the bluffs, tighter in, and it's getting more exposed from those wells and aquifers. So now that we've gone over when to get out and fish and kind of general areas I'm going for, let's go over specific water I'm looking for. And that's going to be slow. We're looking for slow and we're looking for depth. Trout in the winter, they want to not waste a lot of energy and they want protection because the water at that time is usually lower and clearer than it is in the spring and summer. And they still can get picked off by birds and whatnot. So you will see a lot of trout piling into these slower, deep pools, which is why the fishing can be very great because you can get on one of these and just pound on fish. But it can also be bad if you're not finding one of these pools. You can go through a mile section, there's still fish there, but they're not as active. They're not stacked up like they are in the pools. So I really, really look for slower water. And I still fish riffles and runs too, but I still want to find either access to deep water or slower water in those because those fish aren't want to be working quite as hard this time of year to find food. This is going to be a quick gear talk on what I like to recommend for dressing. Just remember to wear long johns and good base layers and layer. You're going to be walking, stopping, fishing, walking, stopping, fishing. Have something you can take off when you're walking, but then you stop the fish, maybe put on or the wind picks up. Always remember to layer when fishing in the cold. Number 2, glove-wise. I'm not a big fan of wearing gloves when I fish. If I'm gonna, there's 2 things I do, and it's only gonna be when it's under 30. Nitro gloves or fingerless wool or both. They're a game changer. The fingerless wool, they keep your core of your hand warm even with your tips exposed, and I've been wearing those ice fishing, steelhead fishing, 15-degree days, just the fingerless gloves, and my tips of the fingers are perfectly fine. Wool also, when wet, will still keep you warm, so if your fingerless gloves get a little wet, they will. But what a lot of guys are also doing now, which I like, is nitro. Nitro, you get a really, really fine grip still as it traps heat, and they work surprisingly well for being just a little thin glove because they suction onto your hand and they just trap all the heat your hand puts out once you put it on, and it keeps a little vacuum around it. They just get bad once you get them wet, so I like to print a few pairs, but they are a real game changer. And between that and the fingerless wool, depending on how I'm feeling, is what I usually will rock. And then even at times you can put the nitro under and then put the fingerless wool over. You're waterproof and you're staying warm. So if you're going to wear gloves, that's my recommendation. But when fly fishing, it's kind of hard to wear gloves sometimes, especially when you want to do a lot of stripping and stuff. So a lot of times I just don't. Just remember to wear good wool socks too. A lot of guys I see say, like, do I need neoprene waders because they have breathable waders because they're fishing in the spring and the summer? No, I wear my breathables. You just layer, you put on 2 pairs of thick wool socks, you put on a pair of long johns, and you put on a pair of thick wool pants, and you're good. And like I said, just make sure you layer. And the nice thing about fishing out in the Driftless is you can make it to where you're not getting way far away from your car. You can keep it a little bit more tame if you want in the winter and don't want to get away as far because you could fall in. It could be a little bit of a walk back. So it's something to keep in mind. But overall, just remember to layer and dress accordingly to the temp. And here's my comments about the icer on the guides. I definitely recommend them if you really, really hate it, but they only make so much of a difference. PAM or de-icers like Loon makes, they do work, but eventually you will still get frozen eyelids when it's cold enough. One last gear tip. If you're somebody that actually wants to get out and fish a lot in the winter, I do recommend investing in a nice outerwear jacket. On those windy, sleety, snowy days, it's going to keep the rain and cold off of you, and having a nice hood you can cinch down and sleeves you can wrap around your cuffs, it makes a really, really big difference. I'm not saying you have to get necessarily a Sims or whatever. I like to use those jackets for a variety of reasons. I don't just use them for trout. I use it as a duck hunting jacket, steelhead jacket. So maybe look into something that you could use for not just trout fishing, but it's nice to have one for trout as well. So the next part is tactics and setup. What am I using this time of year, and what does my exact rig look like? Well, I will admit, in the wintertime, the dry fly bites can be a lot tougher, and I really don't focus on trying to get fish on dries until we get our stronger BWO hatches in the beginning of March, end of February, which can be during the wintertime, but typically I like to consider more springtime. You still get great winter stones and midge hatches on a lot of the smaller spring-fed waters that have a little bit warmer water to promote bugs hatching, but it can be a very finicky deal and very small bugs. So I typically tend to do a lot more nymphing and streamer fishing or leech fishing during this time of year. I'm a big nympher in winter. It works really well in those slow, deep pools and the fish are stuck on the bottom, and you can do really well on it. When I'm nymphing in the winter, I'm typically running 5 or 6X tippet, pretty light because the water is clear and the water's low, so the fish aren't crazy fighting. You can get away with a 6.5X, and sometimes it feels like you need to go to that to get bit more often on these days. And then typically just 7.5 foot leader, and then I do set my depths super deep in the winter, a lot of these holes, so I do keep size 6, size 4 split shot on me. It's kind of a must a lot of times in those deeper slower pools. It seems like putting your indicator just 6 to 8 inches more and putting a split shot on can be all the difference maker. And that's basically it. I like to use the foam Oros. I really like the airlocks too. They're harder to find nowadays. I think the screw does a little better with icing up and stuff and the seal, so I actually do like the airlocks still a little better, but that's pretty simple as that. Double fly rig, and then I could just go over some of the flies I really like this time of year as well. Staples are going to be lightning bug, scud. I really like squirmies too. A lot of guys say they're not flies. Okay, Thai San Juan is the same thing. It's a worm. Like, trout love them. They work well. I also like smaller flashback pheasant tails. They're just a classic go-to. Size 18, size 20. They get bit all winter. There's always small mayflies in the system. I've also found that going to some of those stone patterns, like the smaller winter stones, can be very effective, especially in like more of the freestone rivers we have, like Whitewater or the Kinney. Yeah, you can find those stones on rocks this time of year, and I have small little renditions, size 16s, and they work really well at times. So those are kind of some of the basic nymph patterns I like to keep in the box this time of year. Some guys like some yarn flies or egg patterns as the brown trout spawn gets done with, and you get rainbows and whatnot eating them. But overall, I kind of try to keep it pretty simple. It seems like the scud especially, it just outproduces a lot of everything in the winter. You're fishing a lot of headwaters and spring creeks, and scuds are a big part of trout's diet here in the winter. So yeah, that is kind of my nymphing setup. Just remember to set it deep, use weight, and run a scud if you're in spring creeks. Like, seriously, scuds are just killers. I've caught so many nice fish on scuds early season over the years, and the trout just eat them. It's part of the match the hatch. I mean, that's what we have in a lot of our spring creeks in the winter for bug life. Now, for leeches and streamers, big gaudy streamers can still get bit in the cold times, but I generally like to downsize to more 2.5, 3 inch patterns. It just seems like a little bit smaller. Fish are a little less willing to be as aggressive, even the big ones, and a little less willing to chase. They finish with the spawn, they're tired, they had that fall of aggression, the water's cold. And the streamer fishing can still be decent, don't get me wrong. But you are very limited on some of those marginal big fish areas like the fish. A lot of that stuff is very cold and shelf iced basically this time of year. So a lot of times I do like to downsize smaller because I'm fishing smaller water because of the water temps. And then leeches, a lot of times I don't even streamer fish, I'm throwing just smaller leeches. It seems like those can be a lot more effective on those smaller clear headwaters. Running a little bit more delicate leader on the leeches, 3 to 4X, a little bit longer than I would if I'm using my streamer setup. And that seems to be a really good method for catching a little bit nicer fish, but you can still put up numbers on leeches, in January and February. And then, like the streamer leader, like I said, I do a little bit shorter, 3 to 4 foot. I think I mentioned it before, usually 12-pound test at the biggest. Some guys run 16 or 14, in more brushy areas, but with it being winter and water being a little clearer, and for me, not always seeing the most big fish action in January and February. It seems to be like that happens a little bit later as we get into spring. So I typically run 10 to 12 in the winter when streamer fishing. And a little tidbit here, just about winter fishing in general. It's a great time of year to get out. It's a lot less busy. You can fish some of that more community water, popular stuff without seeing as many people there, which is kind of fun. And typically, like the stocked rainbows here in the Driftless, they seem to bite a little better in the cold, use the faster water a little better. So January and February is a really popular time for at least me to chase some of the stocked rainbows around. You can get into some nicer fish too. I mean, I've gotten freaking 21, 22-inch fish, you know, in February doing nymphing. So you can get big fish chasing these rainbows. There's still big holdovers. And I don't know, a lot of guys like to knock the rainbows in the Driftless, and I love them. I think it's a cool opportunity. And I'm not the biggest catch and keep guy, but I think it offers great opportunities for anglers to catch and keep in the state parks that maybe don't get out and fish as much or trout fish as much. So I'm all for the stocked rainbows, and I think it's a great time of year to chase them, especially when the browns are being finicky and they're just a little more lockjaw off the cold. Go chase some rainbows and go to some streams that are stocked. You'll have a blast. Now, this is going to just be a little side tip as you get into spring, but as the snow melts, as we get out of winter and into spring and the cooling temps of the creeks with the snow melt, all of a sudden, it doesn't take long. You'll have a 2-3 day window of a melt off. Boom. Some of the best fishing is right after these melt offs. And on recent years, it has been in February sometimes when this has happened. So it's just something to stay looking for of that transition out of winter fishing to spring, because that 2-3 days after we get that transition and we lose our snow in the Driftless can be some fantastic fishing. And a lot of times we'll have that happen, and then 2 weeks we'll get another dumping of snow, and the same little pattern will repeat itself. And that's why late winter, early spring, you know, you get to a gray area if you want to call it spring or winter in the Driftless, but end of February, March can be a phenomenal time. So it's great to get out now and just keep getting out more and more as you get later into the winter. So I know it's a fly fishing mainly video, but I did want to give some gear talk for the conventional guys out there. I do a lot of conventional fishing for other species, even trout, but just not in a stream setting. I like to use my fly rod there. But my one tip I can give, I know you guys love your spinners, I know you love your jerk baits, your moving baits, but with this time of year fishing slower water and the fish not wanting to move as much, going to soft plastics, especially like a walleye or smallmouth Ned rig or paddle tail or split tail in that 2.5 to 4 inch range in more trout colors like a brown or a yellow is killer. I know a ton of guys that have sworn by this pattern more in recent years and have been outproducing even in the warmer months spinners and jerk baits, because you can actually let it sit at the bottom of the hole and pop it and let it sit. Make it look like a crayfish, make it look like a heligrommet. You know, it doesn't have to be just a classic cast up reel down to you with a spinner, even like a countdown wrap. You can only let it sit for so long, otherwise it's going to snag on the bottom. So that's my one tip, is to kind of take a book out of the bass and walleye guys and use soft plastics, and you can do a lot better, especially in the wintertime on pressured fish. As always, shout out to Root River Rod Company, a family-owned fly shop here in Lanesboro, Minnesota in the Driftless. They provide a ton of good winter gear that I've been talking about: fingerless wool gloves, split shot, line de-icer, guide de-icer, nymphs for fishing, and then it points you in the right direction if you go in there and talk to somebody. I think it's great to go and stop in these shops if you're in the area, because you're going to get a ton of good free info, and you're going to also just connect with locals and, meet maybe a new guy that you can go fishing with. So I'm always about supporting fly shops, so check them out when you're in the area. A couple last little notes. Just remember, wintertime, the water's clear and the woods are open, so the fish are usually at their most spookiness. So just remember to work up slow, keep your eyes peeled, and be quiet as you work up a trout stream. Gotta be stealthy this time of year. Another thing I wanted to mention is just remember to be safe. If you're falling, go back to your truck and warm up. Don't rough it out and get numb feet. Trust me, it's better to get warm first. Maybe bring a change of clothes in your car if you're somebody that does fall in, because if it happens, it's a lot better driving back with dry sweatpants and a sweatshirt than in your sopping fishing gear. So that's one other recommendation I would have. And just overall, remember, barbless catch and release for Minnesota and Wisconsin. Be safe out there and have a fun time. It's an awesome time of year to go out and explore the Driftless. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. I hope for those looking for some information can take some of this and apply it to themselves and actually go out and have a better day on the water and catch more fish. Even if it's just 1 or 2 pieces of information, I hope you can learn something. Remember to like and subscribe for more videos. I'm going to have a ton more informational stuff while it's still cold here, and then I'll be getting to some good trout and steelhead action. So stay tuned for that. And remember to get out this spring. It's going to be some good fishing, so as we warm up here. Thanks again.